All right, let's get right into it. We've got a big one for you today. Can something like a VR headset, technology, actually make us care more about a huge global crisis like climate change? It sounds a bit like science fiction, right? Well, let's see what the actual science has to say. It all really boils down to this one simple, very human question. Think about it for a second. Why is it that a major crisis happening on the other side of the world, it just feels abstract, right? It doesn't hit you with the same urgency, that same gut punch, as a problem that's right in your own backyard. So what's going on there? Well, it turns out scientists actually have a name for this feeling.
Yeah, they call it the distance problem. And that's a perfect way to put it. It's almost like there's this invisible wall, a mental barrier, that stands between us and these big global crises. It separates us from anything that isn't happening, right here, right now, to people who look and live just like we do.
And the scientific term for this wall is psychological distance. It's that feeling that something is just too remote to feel real. You know what I'm talking about. It's the reason why hearing a statistic like so many tons of ice melted today just doesn't land the same way as stepping outside into a blistering heat wave in your own city. One is an idea, the other is an experience. And that distance, well, it's a huge barrier when it comes to getting people to act. Okay, so this isn't just one big feeling. Scientists actually break this idea of distance down into 4 different types. First, you've got spatial distance. Basically, is it happening far away? Then there's temporal distance. Is this a problem for way off in the future? Third is social distance. Is this happening to people who are different from me and my community? And finally, hypothetical distance. That little voice in your head that wonders, is this even really going to happen? Now think about climate change. It's like the perfect storm, right? It hits all 4 of these, which makes it an incredibly tough problem for our brains to grapple with.
So, okay, we've got this massive psychological wall. The big question then becomes, can we knock it down? Or at least can we punch a hole in it? That's exactly what a group of researchers wanted to find out, and they came up with a really elegant experiment to test it.
So over at Stanford University, they got a group of 163 students to participate in this study. The whole idea was to see if a really immersive, in-your-face kind of experience could shrink that psychological distance. Could they make a far-off climate event feel like it was happening right next door? And if so, would that actually change anything? Here's how they set it up. They split everyone into 2 groups. Group 1 got what you might call the classic media experience. They sat at a computer and just looked at some still photos of a city. Pretty standard stuff. But Group 2, they got to put on a VR headset. They literally got to fly over the exact same city, giving them this incredible sense of being there. It's the difference between looking at a postcard and actually visiting a place. Okay, so here was the procedure for everyone. First step, they got to pick a US location, one that was either close to home for them or one that was really far away. Then, no matter which group they were in, the photo group or the VR group, they all listened to the exact same 2-minute news story about a flood happening in that city. After that experience, they had 2 tasks: write a short story about someone affected by the flood, and then fill out a survey about how they were feeling. All right, so the experiment is done. The data's in. What did they actually find out? Well, this is where things get really interesting, and you start to see the surprising power of that virtual trip. Okay, just look at these results. This is for the distant locations, the ones far from home. The group that only saw still photos, they reported a pretty high level of indifference. They just didn't feel that connected to it. But the VR group, whoa, their indifference levels dropped a lot. That virtual experience somehow managed to make a problem hundreds or thousands of miles away feel personal. It made it feel real. But it gets even more fascinating. It wasn't just that people cared more, it's how they cared that changed. The VR experience actually increased what researchers call adaptive emotions, and in this case, that emotion was frustration. Now, frustration might sound like a bad thing, right? But here's the key. Other research shows that emotions like frustration or even anger are actually way more likely to spur us into action. It's different from feeling sad or anxious, which can sometimes just make us shut down. And if you're looking for proof that isn't just about feelings, here it is. This is about behavior. Remember that short story they had to write? Well, for those distant locations, the people in the VR group wrote stories that were, on average, a full 30% longer. Think about that. That's not just a checkbox on a survey. That's a direct measure of how much more invested they were, how much deeper they were thinking about the human side of the story. I mean, you really can't say it better than the researchers themselves did. They concluded that VR has this incredible potential to, quote, make distant places feel close,
foster emotional connections, alter risk perceptions, and promote climate storytelling. That pretty much nails it, doesn't it?
Okay, but this is science, so it's never quite that simple, right? There's another really important piece to this puzzle that we need to talk about. The researchers were curious if a person's political beliefs would change how they reacted to all this.
And it turns out the answer was, well, it's complicated. What they found was that, yeah, political orientation definitely mattered for some of the results. But, and this is the crucial part, for other results it didn't seem to matter at all.
So let's get into the specifics here. When it came to self-reported feelings, things like how frustrated they felt or how much risk they perceived, politics did play a role. Liberals in the study tended to report stronger emotional responses. Okay, but here's the real kicker. Remember that behavioral measure, the length of the story they wrote, that storytelling investment? Politics had no effect on that. After the VR experience, both conservatives and liberals showed a similar jump in how engaged they were with the story. That's a huge deal.
So let's zoom out. What does all this mean? I mean, why should we care about a study with some college students in VR headsets? What's the real-world impact here?
Well, what this research really hammers home is that when it comes to huge, complex issues, just throwing more facts and figures at people doesn't work. The way we tell the story, the way we communicate the problem, that can be just as important as the information itself. It's about making people feel it, not just know it. So if you're going to take away just a few things from this, let it be these. Number 1, immersive experiences, like VR, aren't just a gimmick. They can actually tear down that psychological wall that keeps us from caring about distant problems. Number 2, they can stir up the right kind of emotions, those adaptive ones, like frustration that actually push us to do something. And maybe most importantly, number 3, focusing on actions and behaviors, like getting people invested in the story, could be a path to bridging some of those deep ideological divides on really tough subjects.
And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If a virtual experience can make a faraway crisis feel like it's happening in our own backyard, well, could these virtual journeys be the key that finally unlocks widespread, real-world action?